between iron bars and open hearts. The first time Officer Mara Delgado looked into Celeste Vane's eyes through the reinforced glass of the intake window, she felt something shift inside her chest, not a flutter, not a spark, but a slow tectonic movement, like the earth quietly rearranging itself beneath her feet without warning, without permission, without any regard for the life she had so carefully built on top of it. Mara had been a corrections officer at Whitmore, women's correctional facility, for 7 years. 7 years of steel doors and fluorescent lights that hummed like dying things. 7 years of learning how to build walls inside, herself just as thick and solid as the ones surrounding the compound. She had watched women arrive broken and leave more broken, had watched the system chew through human beings, like a machine that felt nothing and expected nothing in return. She had grown efficient. She had grown careful. She had grown lonely in a way she no longer had a name for, the kind of loneliness that becomes invisible because you stop looking for it. Celeste arrived on a Tuesday in November, when the sky outside was the color of old pewter and the facility smelled of industrial cleaner and something underneath it that never quite came clean. She was 29 years old, convicted of fraud, a white-collar case tangled in the financial wreckage of a collapsed nonprofit where she had worked as an accountant. Her file said she had embezzled funds. What her file did not say was that she had been covering for someone else, protecting a director who had convinced her that love meant sacrifice, that loyalty meant silence, that standing in front of a speeding train was romantic if the person who pushed you there said they loved you first. Mara would not learn any of this for months. In those early days, Celeste was just an inmate number, a face above an orange uniform, a pair of dark eyes that looked at everything in that facility with a kind of quiet devastation that Mara recognized the way you recognize a song you haven't heard in years, suddenly, completely, and with an ache you cannot explain. Mara's job was to enforce rules, maintain order, and keep her personal feelings pressed flat and buried deep. She was good at this. She had trained herself to see inmates as her professional responsibility rather than as individuals with full interior lives, because caring too much in a place like Whitmore was how you got hurt, how you got compromised, how you lost yourself entirely. She had watched other officers fall into sympathy and then into chaos. She had promised herself she would never be one of them. She kept that promise for 6 years, 11 months and approximately 3 weeks. It started with the library. Whitmore had a small lending program, and Mara volunteered to oversee book distribution on Wednesday afternoons because it broke the monotony of patrol rotations and because privately, books had always been her one true sanctuary. Celeste began requesting them systematically, not romance novels or thrillers, like most inmates preferred, but dense literary fiction, poetry collections, the kind of books that suggested a person who used reading the way a drowning person uses a piece of driftwood, clutching it not for entertainment but for survival. Mara noticed. She began setting books aside that she thought Celeste might want before Celeste even requested them, telling herself it was simply good librarianship, telling herself she would have done the same for anyone, knowing somewhere, underneath the justification, that she was lying to herself in the specific way people lie when the truth is too large to look at directly. They began talking through the process of book exchanges, brief and supervised and technically within professional boundaries. Celeste had a voice that was low and careful, like someone who had learned to measure every word after having words used against her. She spoke about literature the way Mara thought about it privately, as a form of breathing, as proof that interior worlds existed and mattered, and could not be imprisoned regardless of what the body was subjected to. Their conversations were never long. They were never inappropriate, but they were alive in a way that nothing else in Whitmore ever was. Little pockets of genuine human warmth inside an environment engineered to drain warmth from everything it touched. Mara began to dread Wednesdays and crave them at the same time, which was when she knew she was in serious trouble. She started paying attention to things she had no professional reason to notice, whether Celeste had slept, whether she was eating, whether the particular look of strain around her eyes meant she'd had a difficult night in the cell block. She noticed when other inmates gave Celeste trouble and found herself restructuring patrol routes accordingly. telling herself it was about general safety, telling herself the same careful lies she had been accumulating since November. She went home at night to her small apartment and sat with a book open in her lap and stared at a page without reading it, thinking about a pair of dark eyes and the specific quality of the silence that existed between two people who are both pretending they do not feel what they feel. The crisis came in February, when Celeste was attacked in the yard by 3 inmates who had decided she was an easy target. Too quiet, too contained, not visibly aligned with any of the protection networks that form in places like Whitmore out of pure necessity. Mara was the first officer to respond. She remembers the moment with a clarity that still cuts. Celeste on the ground, one arm over her face, not crying out, not begging, just enduring. The way someone endures who has practiced endurance until it becomes their resting state. Mara did her job. She separated the inmates, called for medical, filed every report correctly. But when the medical team was assessing Celeste turned her head and found Mara's eyes across the room. Something passed between them that could not be filed in any report, could not be explained in professional language, could not be made to fit inside the careful categories that Mara had spent years constructing. She requested a transfer off Celeste's wing the next morning. Her supervisor approved it without question. Mara thought distance would recalibrate her, would remind her body and her heart that she was an officer and Celeste was an inmate, and the distance between those two things was not merely physical, but legal and ethical and absolute. Distance did not help. Distance only clarified what she had been trying not to see, that she was in love with someone she had no right to love, in a situation that had no clean resolution, no path forward that did not require someone to lose something essential. What happened next was not dramatic. It was quiet, which is often how the most significant things happen. Celeste was granted a case review 6 months into her sentence when new evidence emerged regarding the non-profit director's documented pattern of financial manipulation and coercion. An advocacy organization that worked with incarcerated women had taken her case and, over the course of a year, built the kind of argument that courtrooms occasionally, rarely, imperfectly might actually hear. Mara knew about the case review the way all officers know about significant case developments, through official channels, through paperwork. She told herself she felt nothing particular about it. She told herself it did not matter to her personally. She was again lying. Celeste was released on a Thursday morning in October, 14 months after she arrived. Mara was not on shift. She had arranged her schedule carefully so that she would not be there, because she understood that watching Celeste walk out of those gates in a personal capacity, while still employed as an officer of that facility, was a line she could not cross without destroying something she had worked for. She went home instead. She sat by her window and looked at the autumn light falling across the street and thought about everything she had never allowed herself to say. 3 weeks later, she was in a bookstore, the same independent shop she had visited every few weeks for years, when she turned a corner in the poetry section and found Celeste standing there with a volume of Pablo Neruda open in her hands. The universe, Mara had always privately suspected, has a very specific and occasionally cruel sense of humor. They stood looking at each other for a long moment in which everything complicated and impossible between them simply existed without either of them flinching from it. Celeste was in her own clothes. Her eyes were the same, outside those walls, without the orange uniform and the fluorescent lighting and the entire apparatus of the carceral system pressing down on everything between them. She looked both different and entirely achingly familiar. They talked for 2 hours in the coffee corner of that bookstore. Mara had resigned from Whitmore the week before, a decision she had been building toward for months, driven by a growing disillusionment with a system she had watched cause more damage than it repaired. This was true. It was also true that she had understood, somewhere deep and honest inside herself, that she needed to step outside those walls before she could look honestly at what she felt and what she wanted. Celeste told her, over bad coffee and the quiet sound of turning pages somewhere nearby, that she had spent 14 months being angry at the world for the situation she had been put in, and then slowly, painstakingly, had decided that anger was a room she could not afford to live in permanently. She had chosen, with great difficulty and without any guarantee of outcome, to look for the small true things instead: a book, a conversation, a correction officer who had once set aside a collection of Mary Oliver poems because she thought Celeste might need them, and who had been right. What grew between them afterward was not simple. Nothing real ever is. There were complications of history and trust, and the particular difficulty of forming genuine intimacy when one person's memory of you is inseparable from the worst period of their life. There were friends of Mara's who did not understand, and family members who asked questions she did not yet have neat answers to. There was the ongoing process of Celeste, rebuilding her life outside incarceration, the practical and emotional labor of that reconstruction, the days when the weight of everything that had happened made the present moment very hard to inhabit. Mara learned to sit with difficulty without trying to fix it. Celeste learned, again slowly and with great effort, that care offered freely without conditions was not a trap. They were not a fairy tale. They were two women who had found each other in the least likely of places, who had chosen honesty over comfort and presence over safety, who had decided that love, real love, the kind that asks something of you and changes you and refuses to be convenient, was worth the complication of pursuing it in a complicated world. On quiet evenings in the apartment they eventually shared, with books stacked on every surface and light coming through tall windows, Mara sometimes thought about the version of herself who had stood in a facility hallway 7 years ago and decided that caring too much was dangerous. She did not think that woman was wrong exactly. She just thought she had been afraid of the wrong things. If this story moved something in you, if you have ever loved someone across an impossible distance, or chosen hope when the evidence for it was thin, or found something true and worth keeping in the most unexpected place, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to remember that love finds its way even through walls that were built to keep everything out. Your support means more than you know, and it helps these stories reach the people who need them most. Before we go, we would love to hear from you in the comments. Tell us about a moment when kindness or love surprised you, somewhere you least expected it. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to read today, because in the end, that is what Mara and Celeste both discovered, separately and then together, that the heart, given enough time and enough honesty and enough stubborn refusal to stop reaching for other people, will always find its way home.